Okay. Díomh ar fad, go many díomh. Mar bhí sé seachtain na Gaeilge an seachtain Secate, tá mé chun tosú an ucht as Gaeilge. Go many díomh agus gur maithagibh go léir a bheith an seo le haghaidh an céad chat mar a deartha le Humanism Association of Ireland. Tá mé anasásta a bheith an seo mar i gcónaí. Tá seo mar cethar dhéag caint atá mé géanamh ar son Humanism Association of Ireland, agus tám cinnte go bheith an oíche seo le Mary McDermott anna simú agus inis Jerry Dominic chun rá fáilte rós Mary. Good evening, Mary.
Well, good evening all, and many thanks for your invitation. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Mary. And just before you begin, as always, I will give a small overview of this evening in terms of the process for those who are new. If you can kindly listen to some of the pointers we have around the process and format of our evening. I will be hosting the event, and Mary, as I said, has been kind enough to join us this evening. In terms of engagement, we will have questions and answers after some conversation and discussion and presentation information shared from Mary herself. We aim, as always, to get to about 8 p.m. Where we come to questions and answers. So at that point, if you want to ask a question, get engaged, be involved, you simply have to raise your hand with the hand function on your Zoom functionality, and I will do my best, as always, to make sure everybody gets to talk and speak with our guest speaker. Again, we always ask to be kind and respectful and mindful of our audience, and myself as host, and of course our speaker. We aim to get to around 8:30. We sometimes go over, and if our guest speaker Mary is happy to go on a little bit more, and we can look at that. And now a few small words on what is humanism. Humanism is a simple philosophy. It is an ethical life stance which focuses on human values, being good without God. It is about taking responsibility and treating others with respect while living our one life. And if you'd like to know more or have a more in-depth description of the fundamental principles of modern humanism, otherwise known as the Amsterdam Declaration, you can see that online. And of course, you'll find it on our website, www.humanism.com. Our speaker this evening, Mary McDermott, is the CEO of Safe Ireland, whose mission is to make Ireland the safest country in the world for women and children. Mary is also adjunct professor at the School of Applied Social Studies at UCC, and Mary will speak on this important topic this evening, as you see from her title, Domestic Violence, Archetype or Exception. Mary's work focuses on identifying patterns of coercion based on sex, gender, and sexuality, on developing domestic violence-focused national infrastructures, on supporting the work of the victim-survivor-centered domestic violence frontline services sector. Mary, you are, again, as mentioned, most welcome, and thank you for joining. How are you this evening?
Well, thank you very much, Michael, and I'm very happy to be here on behalf of Safe Ireland. And to discuss a very important issue that's subject to a lot of discussion of late. So in our preparation, Michael, you communicated to me that I would have 20 to 25 minutes, so I will take that time. I'm going to, in advance, just let you know that you're going to have a little bit of death by PowerPoint. But the focus of the material is really not for you to absorb it. It will be available to you if you would like to have it. But it is really just to try and put, I suppose, to a certain extent, resonant images in your mind, nothing triggering, so that's okay. But just because you are the Humanist Society, and I'm very happy to be here, to have an opportunity to really think and talk and reflect on a very serious matter indeed. And so the subject this evening of whether domestic violence is an archetype or an exception, I hope by the end of it you may understand why I've posed that question. So I'll just proceed with presenting to you, and I hope that that's okay with you. And please do bear with me that it is a little bit of death by PowerPoint, but we'll proceed anyway. So can you see my slide? Is that presenting?
Yes.
Very good. Is it in full screen mode?
No, it's not. No.
Now.
Yes.
Great, great, great. Okay. So this evening, I really just wanted to pose this question to a group that is clearly, very clearly philosophically inclined and thinks about what narratives hold us up and what belief systems we operate on, either personally or indeed socially. So I'll plough ahead with this. So the presentation in general is really going to look at our work as a rule. It's going to look at some of the problems with what we call the domestic violence problem, especially looking at language, and pose some solutions and see if my thesis that it is actually an archetype rather than an exception, that will help us to move into the future when we consider this really serious problem. So the first thing, Michael, I just need to be able to make sure that everyone can see all of my slide, because I can only see bits of it. So is
no, it looks fine, Mary.
Yeah. Great, great. Thank you very much. That's great. So the first thing I just want to talk to you about is that Safe Ireland's domain of work really looks and examines domestic, sex, gender and sexuality-based violences. Now, I know that already you will not be familiar with that line of language or even those words in sequence, but we can talk about that afterwards. But I'd ask you just to sort of suspend disbelief for the minute and hold that in your mind. So the terminology, the framework we're working here is domestic, sex, gender and sexuality-based violences and how that operates in our society. Safe Ireland is an organisation. We have core functions, and here we have really 4 essential functions. And that is really to look at the cause and effect of domestic violence. It is to develop guidelines for prevention and response. It is to deliver and supporting frontline and specialist accommodation and support services. And another part of our work is also to engage in strategic policy and structures and to engage in public discourse, which we're doing this evening. In terms of how we look at the matter as a whole, we have 2 ways of framing it. The first thing we see that our work really pertains to is to developing 21st century analysis and language, that we need new frames of language and new vocabularies to really deal with, you know, the long-standing patriarchies that have caused a lot of this problem and emerging patriarchies, and we can discuss that at length. I'm sure it'll be fiery, I hope so. And we need to look at the nature, the function and the dynamics of coercive control, which, as you may know, came into law as a crime in 2019 and really is the fundamental dynamic which supports domestic, sexual, gender and sex-based violence. More practically, what Safe Ireland does is that we really advocate, and have been doing so, especially since the outbreak of COVID, for national to local, integrated, coherent domestic violence services and infrastructures. And we have been quite effective in that. If I was to say to you, what is the imagination that holds this up? We're trying to say that given the nature and extent of this problem, really what we want to do is to create an overground railway, so that anyone who is in an abusive or coercive relationship, adult or child, by the way, can escape abuse. And so we work with the Department of Housing, with the Department of Justice, with finance and supports. We work with NGOs, our cognate NGOs and our colleagues, to try and make escaping abuse something that is not extraordinary, to really try and face down the fear and the fatalism that we have in this country around domestic violence, the shame, the stigma, the silence, overcome this and really bring new language to bear on it. We also have worked very hard there. You'll see the word CUAN, and CUAN is the new national state agency that was established in February 24, just last month, to really hold and coordinate the implementation for a systematic and integrated response to domestic violence in the country. And we welcome that very much. We worked very hard for that to be the case. So we'll be holding high standards to it, but we are very welcoming of it and supportive of all those who are in it. From our own point of view, we are very strongly connected, and you'll see later when I'm just going through who we are as an organisation, that we're very strongly community-based. And so we, over the last number of years, at the same time as we have been working for large-scale infrastructural change, we've also been trying to work for community-based responses. How can we strengthen that, empower it, and what features would it have? So we have a project called the Safe Spaces series, and in 2022 we published the Safe Place document, which has since become a national blueprint for refuge design and provision, a 21st century form of response. Just in December last, we published Safe Practice, which is a way of supporting frontline services as we move into a more formalised dealing with domestic violence. So we need safe practice, safe organisation, and support frontline practitioners. And this year we hope we will be bringing forward Safe Community. And that's an interesting project, because what we do there is we ask domestic violence to really engage with community development principles. But more interestingly, from my point of view, is we also ask community development practitioners who traditionally might shy away from the private domain to pull considerations about domestic violence into their practice, not just in their practice, but also their theory. So we're looking forward to seeing what's going to happen there. And that's a great project that we're developing at the moment. So now, okay, I gave myself this title and I kind of panicked when I was starting to develop the PowerPoint for this evening and pull some of the material together that we use all the time. And I realized actually it's quite a complex issue. So the first and a reliable place to start is always with definition. So what is an archetype? So an archetype is a very typical example of something, or if you're a psychoanalytic or Jungian practitioner, it's a primitive mental image that is effectively in the collective unconscious. So is domestic violence, does it have that shape? And if it's an exception, in other words, it isn't really something that's really that common, it doesn't have a pattern particularly, it is a thing that is excluded from a general statement and does not follow a rule. So if domestic violence is an exception, to paraphrase that definition, it means that there is no identifiable pattern. My thesis is that it is, in fact, very much an archetype, and I hope we can discuss it by the end of the evening. So I'm going to just give you what might be called, if domestic violence, which is a terrible thing to say, was a country, I'm going to sort of give you a helicopter view over the whole lot. And we're going to do ground zero to zero tolerance. That will make sense to you, because ground zero, as we all know, has a war metaphor attached to it and a very crushing point. But zero tolerance then is, by coincidence, is the name of the recently published national strategy for dealing with domestic violence. So the intention here, and I really, really will hope that you will rest into this, the intention here is overview. So it is not to overwhelm you with data or information. But I think even by looking at the screen, you might see that there's a lot of information here. And that it needs a lot of consideration. So please, while it is a little bit death by PowerPoint, I really just want you to absorb what sense you get from it. So the first thing I'm going to put up is probably the single most overwhelming thing you'll see for the evening from me. And this is a document we use frequently. We developed it in 2020 when COVID broke out. And you can see here that this is the journey of, in this instance, is a woman as a child as she is represented, but it is the journey effectively of anybody who is in a relationship, and certainly with children, out of abuse. And I just want to stop for a second and just take 2 seconds. You don't even have to take all this information in. But if you just look to the right of the woman on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see 4 categories: safety, wellness, home, and money. And to escape a coercive relationship, or a violent relationship, or an oppressive home, particularly anyone with children, but indeed anyone trying to escape that sort of situation, will have to follow all of these paths out simultaneously. At any one point, if you take safety, for example, the path out may become so unsafe that you have to go back. Money may make you stay. There may be nowhere to go, more and on. Mental health, addiction, not only of yourself, but of your children, may force you back into it. So you can imagine I'm quite impatient when people say to me, why does she stay? Look at that. That's why she stays. It's extremely difficult to leave an abusive and coercive relationship. So let's move on to that. Now, in addition to that, children also have a separate and independent journey. They are direct victims of domestic violence in their own right, separate from their parents, separate from their mother, who for the most part is the carer, but not always. And they will have an array, as you can see here, of very, very heavy oppressive things to deal with. In addition, there's a formal element where child protection services, the state has a responsibility, so there's a third party in there immediately. And the child as a vulnerable person, or indeed the young person, if they are between 15 and 17, will need specific supports. So it's quite complex. Okay. Right. So the last piece of information that I'm going to give, this is another, there's millions of stats. Data gathering is a very serious problem in relation to domestic violence in the country. But really, I would just want you to look at the two highlighted ones in the middle of this, which is 2018, over 53,000 calls to domestic violence helpline. Now, this is before COVID. And in 23, 54,000 to the Gardaí. So I would just ask you to note that, you know, if one rings a helpline is one thing, to get to the point of having to ring a guard is another thing. Those figures alone will just give you an idea of the absolute scale of the problem of domestic sex, gender and sexuality-based violence in the country. It is, as Leo Varadkar noted, perhaps regrettably, he may regret it, because of course resources need to be put to any statement a politician makes, but he called it an epidemic. And in fact, he was absolutely correct. So now, is that all I need to say to you, that is domestic violence a societal archetype or an exception? Let's just move on to say, look, it's not a blank page. There's history and lots of action and lots of active care and professionalism and specialist skill involved in all this. So let's just look at some of the infrastructure that is available already. So the origins of the existing infrastructure and responses at frontline level lie in grassroots women's community-based responses. And this is a map you will see of the Safe Ireland network. It's a network of independent affiliated members who are all their own organisations, who are all around the country. And you can see it's quite extensive. There are other organisations, there are rape crisis networks, there's a men's development network. There are a whole range of services from around the country who provide frontline services. So this is just Safe Ireland's network. The kinds of services that they provide are helpline and referral supports, one-to-one emotional, therapeutic and practical support, information and advocacy, court, Garda or welfare accompaniment, housing and welfare advice, child protection supports, and of the network that we host, 20 members operate a refuge. We ourselves operate refuge in Mayo and service in Cavan Monaghan. So that'll give you an idea that when you go back to that map that I showed you of the journey of a woman trying to escape, frontline services are completely aware of the complexity and the traps and the cul-de-sacs that people trying to escape domestic violence have to deal with. So I want to just spend a little, if it's, sorry, I've clicked ahead there. Right? You'll have to excuse me now when I go back, yes. It's really just, since I'm aware that I'm sitting in a screen with a lot of people who have chosen a kind of an unusual, or certainly not the mainstream philosophical position, traditionally the mainstream philosophical for a world belief system. that I just thought I might set out some of the assumptions that we have when we are dealing with it in Safe Ireland. So I suppose the first thing that we really need to state very clearly is that the journey out of coercive control and a relationship or home is structurally, socially, personally complex and overwhelming. And the private and public split that hides is by design, it obscures the problem of domestic violence as a social problem. We're very, very, very clear that domestic violence cannot be reduced to poor personal choice. And indeed, caricatures of any victim are a perpetrator's weapon. So in other words, the caricatures about what it means to be a victim are actually part of the weaponry that keep people in abusive relationships. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. It prevents victim recognition. Domestic violence, more importantly, is not correlated with the usual markers of social inclusion or exclusion indeed. So class, race, disability, religion, any of these issues, the long list that we have for both vulnerable and marginalised groups have no bearing on domestic violence. And it's one of the ways in which domestic violence is hidden. But it has identifiable patterns and it is separate to the dominant intersection analysis for marginalised and vulnerable groups. So now I'm coming back to, I suppose, really the title that I put on one of the opening, I suppose, descriptions of domestic violence that are put forward is that sex, gender and sexuality is the matrix of power that is specific to this type of violence. Now, the whole evening isn't going to be on that, but I think if you think about it a little while, you may yourself understand it. It is a distinct section in what is known as intersectional analysis. And since it's not, since it has not been awarded a distinct section in intersectional analysis, it means that domestic violence is constantly erased and hidden. Coercive control, therefore, is a large-scale social problem, and the effects of coercive control and domestic violence on society as a whole are extensive and costly. So when we say, usually, we see domestic violence, and it has been our strong argument for many years now, is that really when we think about domestic violence, it really is a keystone national social policy issue. And the estimated cost to survivors is 56 billion over 20.5 years, 20.5 years. Now that's a piece of research we did with Safe Ireland, carried out with the National University in Galway. And I just would note that there is no costing in this to the department or to the state. This is only to survivors over a 20-year journey. And just to be clear that it correlates internationally, it's somewhat similar to other large-scale research projects that have been carried out. So domestic violence costs the state a fortune, to the survivors and also to the state.
Hi there, quick question. Personally for me, I used to get beat by my year 3 phonics teacher.
Sorry, there's no talking until our speaker has finished her presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. I'm nearly finished, folks, so I would be quite ready to answer any questions.
Yeah, no problem. Just for our, maybe who's just joined, we have
it may be a mic on.
Yeah,
I'll just shut the fuck up. Cheers.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. Okay. So just what we just want to do, I just want to round up now and I'm trying to give you an overview of what's been happening, the nature of the problem, the kinds of responses, the difficulties we're facing, especially with younger people and how they understand and respond to this problem. So we want to look at ground zero to zero tolerance. That's where we're moving in principle, which is great. So in February, CUAN, the new domestic violence state agency, was established, and we really, really welcome that. The policy context for that is the National Strategy Zero Tolerance. Backing that is the Istanbul Convention of 2019, when Ireland ratified the convention, and also a Grevio report which came out in 2024, which is an EU assessment. Most
Mary, you're on mute.
I didn't mute myself, Michael. I think you may have muted me inadvertently there.
Apologies, Mary. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. So the final slide then is finishing now. So just to let you know that this is the vision that Safe Ireland has. It's really a community-based response to domestic violence, but it is government supported and it has a fully integrated and cascading effect. And we really believe that this is a possible thing. We have great hope for it. We can create that overground railway, take away the fear and the fatalism, face the shame and the stigma and the silence, and do something about it. So I think what I just want to do is close now with a question to you. So does domestic sex, gender and sexuality based coercion have identifiable patterns? If it does, is it an archetypal form of control of violence? And if it does, what are the implications for us socially and personally? That's it. So
we are going.
now I'm sorry. Somebody
Sorry,
keep.
Mary, you're fine. Thank you so much. I'm just making sure. So for those who have joined maybe later from the start, if you could kindly stay on mute just for the moment. And if you want to ask a question, if you can politely raise your hand, and we will take questions. But before we do, Mary, so thank you for that. So very interesting. I guess one question for me is, how is your view on domestic violence today and the work you're doing versus if we take 50 years ago? You know, if you were back, you know, working at that time, do you think you would find the same interest in your work and the ability to promote it versus what we have today? So you think things have improved in general where we're allowed to have these platforms versus what it might have been 50 years ago?
Well, the answer to that, Michael, is that there's a great grassroots movement over 50 years ago that started this all off. So, you know, there's a high degree of analysis and awareness of it. And I think, you know, certainly the women's movement is core to all this, as anyone will know, but so is a human rights context. And even a general, I suppose, even more broadly, the issue around violence itself. So the simple answer to that is 50 years ago, what wouldn't have been is the vocabulary nor the resources. But the analysis was there from the beginning, from the early women's movement. You know, as soon as you start speaking about suffrage, as soon as you start removing the marriage bar, as soon as you start saying women are not chattel, that they're not the property of their husbands, and indeed that children are the property of their parents, well, then you're going to start to move into a situation where people are going to move for freedom and autonomy and safety.
So there's more appetite today for having these types of conversations, that we can have these two-way conversations, if you will, where, because I think my take on it would be, you know, perhaps just for simplistic terms, 50 years ago, the interest and the dialogue and ability to engage. I mean, even
hey, sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt. I just see some messages being spammed in the chat. Just wondering if this could be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. We'll come to that when we just finish talking to Mary. So yeah, so Mary, you know, I think it is brilliant that we see better movement and momentum. So we will look at opening up to our floor and to those that are here. To start off with, though, we can look at some of the questions. So let's just start off with the questions we have. We have Jamie. Domestic violence keeps this world running. Okay, wow. We won't be speaking to that. And that is not the type of thing we want to see this evening.
Oh, it's very common. It's not
so,
neither here nor there.
I think we'll just move to questions. Mary, you've raised your hand. Good evening, and thank you for joining. And it was great to see you on when I thought you were already Mary, the host. But Mary, this is Mary who was keen to be on from 7 p.m. So Mary, please go ahead and ask your question.
Mary, you're muted. Over.
You're muted. We can't hear you.
You're still muted. Over.
Sorry. Okay, here I am. You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It's okay to speak?
No.
Mary, I
Okay.
think you're free to speak. Go ahead. I can hear you.
Thank you, Mary. I was wondering what everybody's take is, the professionals rather, on teen to parent violence, and mirroring that of the close intimate partner in the home after you've escaped or removed yourself from that particular situation. I personally seeing my therapist is Don Hennessy at the moment, so he's kind of saving my life. But I was wondering what if any, things are going to be put in place in up to 50% rise, according to Parent Line, especially since COVID. Yeah.
Well, I suppose, well, thank you for that, Mary. And it is a very real issue. It most certainly is. I mean, there's a number of things I'd say. First of all, and I suppose I have to say this really strongly, and that's clear in the statistics I showed you about the telephone helplines. You know, the numbers, COVID did not cause domestic violence or sex, gender or sexuality-based violence. It exposed it. But what I think it has done is allowed us to speak more openly about it.
Mary, you're muted. We can't hear you.
I'm not.
I can hear her.
Maybe it's a problem on my end.
Okay. So, right, Mayor, I'll just continue here. And if there's a problem, Michael, you can just shut me down if necessary.
No, I can hear you. I can hear you
Yeah,
now.
okay.
Go,
So
please go
just to
ahead.
say, COVID did not cause, it exposed domestic violence from our particular point of view. What we can see is an increased awareness of it. It's becoming more visible. People are getting better vocabulary around it. So we have to deal with, we certainly have to deal with femicide. That's at an a horrific rate. We have to deal with also issues like siblicide, infanticide, and familicide. So it is really, really, it's quite a difficult problem. And just as you are well aware, Mary, if you're working with Don Hennessy, you know his analysis, it's very sharp. So sex, gender and sexuality is the dynamic on which this all runs.
Yeah.
And those hierarchies are replicated. It isn't just between partners, it's within families and
Yes.
it's intergenerational.
I've experienced a level, especially from TUSA, of a level of gaslighting. The abuse, the secondary abuse from the system, has been worse than any abuse that I've ever encountered in my own home. And Don himself has reiterated that some of the women in TUSA are worse than the male perpetrators he's had the pleasure of working with over the last 30 so years, or however long he's been helping people, to his own detriment as well sometimes. So not to be blunt, well, to be blunt, because sometimes you need to be, but his advice was to just... Sorry. Sorry.
Go ahead, please, Mary. You're fine.
Was just, to run away, like.
Please go ahead, Mary. You're fine. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah,
Demonic
no,
forces everywhere. Sorry, I have autism as well, so you have to excuse me. Sorry,
beg your pardon. May I just apologise for some of the audios we've had there. I've done my best to ensure that we can continue in a polite manner. So please go ahead. Thank you so much, Mary.
Okay, so due to the experience of dealing with the services in the last 2.5 years, the only conclusion that we can come to, is for me to run away because my life is in danger, So because there are no other services that can help me, because you're dealing with a teenager, but this is in my opinion, this is a personality disorder, and we're raising, a group of teens that are just going to go out and create havoc in the world because they don't like the word no,
Well, Mary, I'm clearly not going to make any comment on individuals in Tusla, but what I would say to you is that some of the issues that you've raised are really very serious matters, and we have been in conversation with Tusla, and it is a very difficult thing. And let's just remove domestic violence entirely from this, and let's even remove your personal situation entirely. Trying to understand what it means for children to have rights and parents to have rights in a relationship that is fundamentally entwined, that is fundamentally probably has various levels of vulnerability in it, is very, very difficult. In addition to that, when you have children and young people in a situation where they will be, a third party will be brought in, and where, in a lot of instances, it is, I'm very, very well aware of, we are at Safe Ireland are very challenging, I can assure you, when it comes to the setting of child protection issues over against an abused mother, for example. That happens quite frequently.
Of course.
Welfare is secondary to the welfare of the child. There's a whole debate around that. Our question is that you need an informed domestic violence response to that. There are specialist responses that need to go into place to handle that. So, anything more, I think, would derail the entire evening, Mary, and I wish you well, and also to keep yourself safe and well-bounded. Just take good care, and I hope you have the resources you need.
Thank you.
It's not easy. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Mary. And just to reinforce anything that is discussed this evening, if you have any questions, if you'd like to contact with Mary McDermott directly afterwards, we can arrange that for you. So we will share contact information, and you'll see it in our post summary in our website when we have a little review. So thank you for your input, Mary. Really, really wonderful to hear. We're always appreciative of everybody that is brave enough to speak, and that's what our Humanist Association Ireland talks are all about, which I hope Mary McDermott is getting a sense of. We have Cleena Byrne. Good evening, Cleena. I can see you there, hand raised. Please unmute yourself and say hi.
Hi, I'm actually Stephanie. That's my daughter's Zoom. I'm using. Thank you for your presentation, Mary. It was very, enlightening in a very disturbing sense, if I can use that phrase. I'm interested in your term emerging patriarchy. Could you expand on that, please? Thank you.
Well, I think the first thing that we need to know is that, when you were in any situation of contest, people are not static. So perpetrators are smart, flexible, adaptable, cunning. We are too, by the way, but that's not the point. So we have to keep pace with the new ways in which, I suppose, coercive control, bounding of language, trying to silence, trying to gaslight, all of these are tactics that we're very familiar with. So a perpetrator, I think, let me put it this way. Sometimes when, as you will see from my presentation, the primary concern for us in Safe Ireland is to remove the shame and the stigma and the silence. And one of the ways that we've done that, for example, in this case, with an example or an analogy with mental health in this country, we've managed to do that. But one of the ways you do it is by really understanding that is not just reducible to your own personal situation. It is a large scale problem. It has structures, it has patterns that you can identify, and therefore you're not, one of the key tactics of domestic violence is victim blaming and gaslighting, where you think you're mad, it must be me. Well, that's also true of domestic violence as a problem. It is a large scale problem. So when you've asked me, about what it means for emerging patriarchies, what we're saying is that there are new languages, that all the contemporary language around males and females, around masculinities, around what it means to be intimate, around what it means to have a home, what it means to be a parent. All of these things are open, as always, to abuse. and to being clever and even taking your own language and turning it against you. So we're just aware of that. We're just very aware of that. So it's not, to put it in a nutshell, I think I'd put it this way. The 1950s model of patriarchy, with which we're all very familiar, has largely long gone. And there are new forms of patriarchies and sexisms and misogynies, and indeed homophobias emerging. So we just need to keep an eye out for it, be aware and be alert. Does that, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Mary, if I may, ask around, some of the kind of subcategories that speak to intimate partner violence. I mean, I've heard the phrase, I've looked at it, the WHO, and we've talked about, Ireland, but there's data that talks about 27% of women from the ages of 15 to 49 who have been in a relationship have reported some form of physical or sexual violence. But that can be broken into subcategories like the power imbalance, you touched on the social norms and the gender roles, the stress of maybe economic hardship, substance abuse, childhood exposure, psychological factors, and perhaps lack of communication skills. And there is a piece there around cultural and religious beliefs, and maybe the isolation, and then jealousy and insecurity, and so is there one that seems to stick out for you more from an Irish perspective, or some from your research and your analysis and the communication? And that's one kind of broad question, right? And I guess another question perhaps.
There's about three in there, Michael.
Well, the second part that would be kind of also looking at men and also men seeing that. So maybe you could touch on those, how you see those subcategories, and also how it affects men too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, the first issue you asked me there was really about, all. Can I just call it the language, all the labels? So you've domestic violence, you've sexual violence, you've intimate partner abuse, you've domestic abuse, sexual abuse, coercive control. The list goes on and on and on and on. Now, as anyone who is interested in philosophy or interested in how language and narrative controls or we construct our world through language and narrative, anything that keeps breaking up a coherent view of the world is an exercise in power. I mean, postmodernism is the example of that par excellence. So when you see this long list of domestic violence, sexual violence, intimate partner abuse, and you keep going on, so that you're absolutely bewildered. I mean, we are ourselves. So we have GGSBS, we have GS, you just lose the will to live. The first thing to note is that that's an exercise in trying to prevent you from joining the dots and naming the problem in a coherent fashion. So they all have a pattern. So when Safe Ireland sits down, when we look at that very closely, and we look at, for example, all the categories of vulnerable groups or marginalised groups in Ireland, which is largely based around, we'll say, race, religion, disability, marriage, the 9 grounds for discrimination, for example, also around poverty. None of those pertain to domestic violence. None, not one. All those groups experience domestic violence, and I'm using domestic violence as a shorthand here. So that's the first thing. So that's why we say it is across sex, gender, and sexuality that this happens. And we do that because that takes account of all the contradictions around hierarchies in each of those groups. In the case of sex, you'll have male over female. In the case of gender, you'll have man over woman. In the case of sexuality, you'll have straight over gay for the most part, or queer, whatever the phrase you want to use in.
Yeah, so gender-based.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that, when people say, what about the men? Of course there are female perpetrators. We know that full well. It's a nonsense to say that that's not the case. We're not living in some romantic, idyll. Nor are females victims, nor are all males agents. Some males are victims and some females are agents in this abuse of power, certainly. But when we're looking at a large-scale social problem, I'm afraid there isn't a hope in hell of that pattern not being reversed. The evidence is there across sex, gender, and sexuality that there's a pattern. And it often revolves around what might be called, which is another whole rabbit hole we could never go down into, is around masculinities and femininities. So that's one issue there. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Michael. The second part of your first question was then around what drives it, and you've talked about money, jealousy, addiction, mental health. Absolutely, but it's not a cause of domestic violence. We're very clear about that. It may exacerbate it. Domestic violence rests on a fundamental, that's why it's so interesting to be in a room like here tonight. And actually our little spammer there was perfectly, summed it up perfectly. How did he put it? Keep beating up, women are objects. There you go. He said it perfectly. Wonderful. There we go. And as we know, that has been enshrined in law for a long time and only fairly recently. So we're trying to get away from that. And we're also trying to attend, I think, to younger people's understanding around their own identities, sexual identities or gender identities, or indeed their sex. So there's a lot of problems there, but power and control still comes in there. So I'm not sure, Michael, I may be rambling on too much here. Does that make sense?
No, it's fine.
Answering any of your questions, I'm not sure if I'm...
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the piece that I'm getting is oversight, momentum, and educate, right? So we're big advocates of education at Humanism Association of Ireland, and put a lot of focus on having conversations, learning and listening, right? So I'm certainly listening. Now, I have a comment on our chat, expanding the concept of language with emerging technologies and AI. How is coercive control, domestic violence being addressed by programming languages? Have you any comments to make on that?
Well, I'm certainly not an AI expert, and I'm presuming that can the questioner come into the room and speak to me? I mean, clearly all languages
if he or she is there, by all means, raise your hand.
Ura, can you come in?
Yes, I'm here. Absolutely. Hi. I'm here. Hi, good evening.
Good evening, Maura.
Thank you for an amazing session. And I was just thinking, there a lot of things are being shaped by technology. I mean, right now, and the emergence of AI, especially for coercive control. I'm particularly interested in a post-relationship context where the partners are no longer together, but the abuser is still able to sustain that abusive relationship even from many miles away. And so my question in this context is, what is happening around technology development? And how is this shaped in a way that it continues to empower the abuser to continue to exert coercive control? Is any attention being, I know this is so many questions in one, sorry for that, but is any attention being put on people who are producing technologies or who are working in that area to see that it is not very gendered in a way that it continues to promote coercive control or give power, more and more power to the abuser?
Well, thank you for that, Maura. Now, you're not going to believe this, but I actually started reading a book today by a wonderful philosopher called Marai Hildebrandt, and she's a specialist in IT and law and freedom and so on. She's I'll forward I don't have the title right here with me just at the minute, but she's certainly considering all this. There's two ends to, I think, to what you're saying. One is in terms of technology facilitated abuse. If you go to our website, safeireland.ie, you will see that we have engaged very heavily with cybersecurity task force and a project in UCC, and have a booklet for frontline practitioners in how to support victims who are being tracked, surveyed. It's a very common thing. It's standard for us. We have a monthly, members meeting of our 37 members around the country, and it's a regular thing. We're very familiar with that technology, be surveillance, tracking, bugging, everything from children's toys to their phone to tracking devices and so on, overhearing, and victims confounded as to why the perpetrator has all the information when they're actually being bugged, basically. So frontline services and those who work in this area are very familiar with all that. The other question of the more fundamental question about, I suppose, coding and the memes and metaphors and even the dynamics of you know, the AI or IT is right. The easiest thing I can do, and I think it goes to Stephanie's earlier question really around the example I would use would be the gaming world. I mean, that is notoriously sexist and misogynistic. Everything from the interface right down to the world itself in terms of who games and who gets to game and trolling and abuse. So even in that, you can see how the games are constructed. I'm quite sure if I had the brain to do it, or indeed you may have that brain, the coding brain may itself be inflected with some of these toxins. So there's lots going on about it and people are aware of it. And, you know, you sound as if you're interested in it. Take it up and follow it up would be what I'd say.
Absolutely. I am already following up. I'm interested in some research around that area, so I'm looking very closely into it. Thank you for your responses. Lastly, I was just wondering what you thought about home technologies that are also very gendered. I believe that where there are home technologies that are, well, we can call them smart technologies now, or whatever term we use to refer to them, mostly the man in the house is usually most interested in how to operate that, how to fix it, what passwords to use, what passcodes to use. And so this gives him, if he is the abuser, you know, more power to continue to sustain an abusive relationship. And this is really what we call coercive control, even if he's no longer living in the house. So I was wondering what you thought about that, about home technologies and how gendered that is. And if anyone addressing that, really.
Well, I think what I would say perhaps to the room more generally is that while there are emergent modalities and changing modalities and what I would say emergent patriarchies, the fundamental principle remains the same. And that is, in an abusive relationship, the perpetrator controls everything. So it isn't that long ago. I remember my father, for example, and he, you know, whatever about that context, and his fellows saying women were too weak to drive cars. Who controlled the remote control? Who had the bank account? So they are all technologies, but they're really based on I think what I wanted to really push into a really interesting room of people humanists who are really looking at, being good without God, but also looking at how rationalities work. Rationalities, then there's a whole range of them, not least of which is computational. There's so many, they are fundamentally inflected with belief systems about the superiority of the male body. And I didn't, Michael, answer your question about men in all this. And in my heart, I really strongly feel that at the heart of all this is a huge vulnerability about the male body that we haven't really been able to really talk about. And, it's not for here no more than, it's a huge issue. But what it is, that fear, that fear and anxiety that seems to drive this is just needs to be addressed at a really deep level, as well as just the will to power and the pleasure of oppression, I suppose. I see Chris's hand is up there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I could respond and engage, and I'm enjoying the ebb and flow of this. But I see Chris's hand up, and I always endeavour to present people the floor. So Chris, if you can unmute yourself, please do.
Yeah, Mary, thank you so much for coming to speak to us tonight. I was just wondering if you could say a bit more about the kind of technology element. Like, I would work in a counselling context, and something like a client saying to me, "Oh, my partner seems to know everything," I wouldn't necessarily recognise as a warning sign that I should be signposting them or asking more questions. And I was just wondering if there was anything else, things like, them revealing their partner is checking their phones, that I should be kind of watching out for as a kind of warning sign to signpost them. Or
well, Chris, it's akin to Wura's question there. what I would suggest is go to our website and check out technology facilitated abuse, and it's geared for your work. In other words, frontline practitioners, you have to kind of kit yourself out to understand some of the tactics that use, and like you won't be able to keep ahead of them. It's like hacking. I mean, if we all understand that as soon as the government stops a hack, the hackers are back. That the analogy is perfect with a perpetrator. They just don't stop.
Yeah.
So it's just a question of trying to create a society where we name it, identify it, don't uphold it, and where we put in structures. And the Istanbul Convention has 4 pillars in it that are supposed to guide the direction around domestic violence and how a state would respond to it, and that is protection, prevention, prosecution, and policy coordination. And so in all of those, under each of those names, there's an entire array of responses that we can have. But the first one is for us to be able to speak about it and to really stop the blaming, stop the shaming, and start naming it among ourselves, and try and create more room for those of us that do not want this, that identify it, and to create a society where this can stop. I mean, we wouldn't be doing this unless we believed it could stop. I don't know if that helps, Chris, but check out our website, and that might help you. And check out Cybersecurity Task Force. Check out UCC. They have something on digital domestic violence and technology. It's called technology facilitated abuse. That might be a term that will help you in your work.
Well, brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate the comment. And as we said, if you want to have connectivity afterwards with Mary and the Safe House team and any of our audience this evening, we will make sure we can facilitate direct plug into that, if that's a technological phrase to use. So we're coming close to the 8:30 mark. Is there anybody else who would like to raise their hand and ask a question? By all means, you are welcome to do so. Okay, silence. So that's 2 things. People have been, taken aback by the honesty, and what we've had to listen to and ponder and wonder about. I'm going to do as I always do, Mary, because I think we're bang on in terms of time this evening, and that's no slant. I think it's just been a wonderful and powerful hour of connectivity. So, as I often do, and people who've been on before, I always leave the final word. Perhaps we might change the title of our talk to the final word, but we do ask for your final word this evening, Mary. Please.
Well, I think first of all, I really want to say it's a privilege to sit in a room like this. I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm aware of how huge and overwhelming this can be. But it is really, really something we can do something about. It is a problem like any other problem, and we can solve it. We just need to be quick-witted and articulate in dealing with it. And I wish everybody well with it. And I hope that in terms of your own lives, if anything has happened to you this evening or you're affected by this, Michael, I am not a counsellor, so contacting me directly would not be the appropriate response. But what will be the appropriate response is, and we say this all the time, is to go to your local domestic violence service. And you will find all of the contact on our website, and Michael will put that there. And I wish you all very well. I really wish you all very well. And thank you for listening. Good night now.
And I guess one little question, are there any events or social gatherings or online events that your team can look at? I mean, if we want to look at more awareness or with Safe Ireland, is there anything that we should be keep looking to flag that you have upcoming, or we can look to get involved in?
Well, we're in website development. That's number one. For those who are anoraks, there's a lot of hefty publications and interesting material on our website. We also, there's a Go Purple Days coming up shortly, so you'll keep an eye on it. But I do strongly urge you just find out who your local domestic violence service is and go to them and see if you can be of any help to them. They are all independent organisations around the country and value support. Sometimes they cannot handle volunteers, but just your interest and engagement would really, really be helpful. They work very hard and very difficult work. So thank you all.
Brilliant. So what we'll aim to collate some of those go to whether it's online or in person, and we'll share that through our website when we do our small write up, which I'll be doing. And so I've taken plenty of notes, and again, thank you, and thank you to all that have joined. As always, we're super appreciative of you giving your evening to us, and we hope to see you on more talks as we go through the year. And if you want to find out more about, like I said, humanism, you'll see it on our website, humanism.org. So, gur míle maith agat, gach duine go léir, iho agus feicimid sibh go léir a rís tásúla agam. Slán agus beag.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you.
Thank you all.